Catherine Blankenship thought she had found an officer and a gentleman in her husband, Glenn.
He was doing a wonderful job for his country, protecting us.
Catherine was kind of like a teenager in love again, you know. She was very, very happy.
But as Glenn's long-buried secrets rushed toward the surface, the woman with stars in her eyes realized she'd been sleeping with the enemy.
Glenn didn't believe he could go anywhere without carrying a gun with him.
No way in the world did I expect to find what we uncovered.
I thought I had the perfect marriage, and then it all came crashing down.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. Catherine Blankenship wasn't about to let a major milestone pass her by.
I went to Bunkie High School in Bunkie, Louisiana, and in 2007, I was planning our high school reunion.
That April, after reaching out to several old classmates, Catherine received a surprising email from a former student named Glenn Seymour.
The email surprised me because that was the last person I had expected to hear from. It was out of the blue.
Catherine hadn't seen or spoken to Glenn since the 8th grade, when he had dropped out of school.
Glenn in middle school was quiet. He really kept to himself. We knew of each other, but we weren't considered friends.
But the junior high cliques were far behind them, and Catherine marveled at how much Glenn seemed to have changed.
He told me when he got old enough, he went into the Marines, that he was working for Homeland Security. He would go all across the United States. He would protect people. I thought it was very admirable for someone to do such an amazing job for his country. It touched my heart.
Glenn told Catherine he lived nearby, where he shared custody of his daughter from a previous relationship. Catherine was a single mother herself.
We connected on that level right away. The phone calls between Glenn and I would last hours, sometimes up until I had to go to work the next morning. To have that connection with someone is wonderful.
Before long, the new couple had become inseparable. And as Glenn regaled Catherine with tales of his military prowess, she found herself becoming more and more impressed.
When Catherine told me about Glenn's background in the Marines and then into Homeland Security, I thought, well, Catherine's found somebody that's going to be good, you know.
I saw the display of all the service medals, military medals, the military certificates. I was amazed. So it verified that he was an outstanding man.
As the weeks went by, Glenn and Catherine spent the majority of their time together. And in August of 2007, 4 months after Glenn's first email, Catherine was excited to learn she was pregnant.
Glenn's response to me being pregnant, after about 2 minutes of being shocked, he was very, very happy to have another child on the way. Glenn suggested that he and I moved in together. The decision to move in together was easier than figuring out what soda you wanted to drink for the day. It just fit.
Catherine and Glenn seemed destined for each other, and just 1 month later, Glenn proposed.
I was excited. He seemed brave. He was an outstanding father. He seemed wonderful.
But sometimes the battlefield is hard to leave behind. Just 2 years later, Catherine Blankenship would find herself in the middle of a very different kind of war. In July of 2009, Catherine and Glenn came home to an alarming sight. Their front yard was swarming with uniformed men.
We were watching the house, and Glenn Seymour arrived. We asked if we have permission to search the house.
Guns were everywhere in the house. They were loaded.
Catherine was bewildered. "What is this about?" she said. "Why are you doing this to him? He's one of you."
And that's when Catherine's world changed forever.
Well, I said, I don't think something's right there.
It's just a horrific chain of events, all because of Glenn Seymour's actions.
In the fall of 2007, Catherine Blankenship and her fiancé, Glenn Seymour, were newly pregnant with the couple's first child. Glenn's job kept him away from home more than Catherine would have liked, but she didn't complain.
Glenn said he worked Homeland Security while his cover was offshore as an electrician. Glenn worked a typical offshore rig in the Gulf, which was 14 days home and 14 days at work.
Catherine loved everything about her hard-working husband. But as fall gave way to winter, Catherine realized there was one thing about Glenn that made her rather uncomfortable.
Glenn had a massive gun collection. He said some of it was for his Homeland Security job, some was passed down from his grandfather, and some was just because he liked them. He was infatuated with guns. Just about every time he had a free moment, he was either cleaning it, taking it apart, cleaning it, rearranging them. I made Glenn promise me that he would keep them locked up in the gun cabinets and the key put away to where nobody could get access to them, especially my kid.
Glenn promised to keep his guns under lock and key. And in March of 2008, the safe and happy couple welcomed their first child into the world.
Glenn was amazing. When he was home from work, he let me sleep. He'd get up for the midnight feedings, the midnight changings. He wanted to make sure that he didn't miss a moment in our son's life.
He was good. Glenn, as a father, he was loving. He fed, he changed diapers. He would carry the baby with him when he'd go uptown to the video store, show off the baby. He was a proud father.
That July, when Glenn and Catherine married, it seemed like the final piece of the puzzle.
We were both excited, ready to start that next chapter in our lives. I've been married and divorced. He's been married and divorced. This was the one that's going to stick.
1 month later, Catherine learned she was once again pregnant. But the blissful days would soon be over, as Glenn's past came back to haunt him in a most disturbing way. In March of 2009, Catherine woke up to Glenn screaming in the bed beside her. She tried to wake him up, but Glenn was sound asleep.
He finally woke up and I asked him what was going on, and he told me, he said it was just a flashback.
Glenn explained his flashbacks were terrible dreams from his days fighting on the battlefield.
He said he couldn't explain or talk about what they were. He said they were just about the past, and he'd just leave it at that. So it really scared me.
If Glenn's night terrors weren't enough, his old combat injuries had also started to flare up.
Glenn would often speak of being in pain, which was bad headaches from being injured in the Marines while on duty, being hit with shrapnel in the head.
Glenn already had a doctor's prescription for both pain and anxiety medications. Catherine hoped the pills would be enough to get her husband through his trauma.
I was glad that he was on them, because as long as he's getting help and relief, then it worked, so I was happy with that.
But on May 28, 2009, Catherine came home to an alarming sight.
I had some pain pills in my purse from after I had our child, and I found him digging in my purse for my pain pills. I asked him what he was doing in my purse. He said he was looking for a pen. There was a box of pens on the counter. So after he left, went to another room, I went and got my pain pills, and I hid them.
But a few weeks later, when Catherine went to retrieve her pills from their hiding place, they were gone.
Because I was hurting really bad, and found that they were replaced with an over-the-counter pain reliever. I was highly, highly upset.
Glenn would come here and ask me if I had pain pills. I told Catherine about it, and Catherine couldn't believe it.
I confronted him right away about it. He, of course, denied it over and over. He denied it. He was busted, so I just didn't talk to him for the rest of the day. I didn't want to have any more argument. I just wanted to try to let it go.
Catherine worried that her husband had become an addict, but she was about to find out that Glenn's prescription drugs were the very least of their problems.
There was a lie somewhere, and we didn't know where to begin.
Catherine was bewildered. Why are you doing this to him? He's one of you.
It seemed like my whole world fell apart.
By May of 2009, Catherine Blankenship was deeply worried about her husband, Glenn Seymour.
Glenn was on 2 types of prescription pills, one pain pill for shrapnel in his head, and the other pill was anti-anxiety for his flashbacks.
Glenn had been showing signs of addiction, but Catherine was determined to give her husband the benefit of the doubt. until a shocking turn of events changed everything. On July 22, 2009, Catherine and Glenn were returning home from a shopping trip with the children.
We pull up at our house and we see dozens of men standing outside.
The men appeared to be local police officers and U.S. Marshals.
I didn't know what to think. Glenn had often spoke of his job in Homeland Security, that if somebody shows up at the house, ask them certain questions, you don't say nothing because you don't know nothing.
Glenn assured a nervous Catherine that everything was fine.
He seemed calm. He didn't seem worried. When he went up to the gentleman, I figured something happened and they was just maybe trying to get his side of the story. Finally, I got out to go see what was wrong because I was worried. I didn't know what was going on.
But before Catherine could reach her husband, police officers stepped directly in her path.
We approached Catherine and asked her about searching the house. Catherine was bewildered. "What is this about?" she said. "Why are you doing this to him? He's one of you."
The guy asked me if Glenn had a badge. I informed him yes. He asked me if I knew where the badge was. I told him yes. So I walked the guy inside the house. I went to the bedroom where it was last, and the badge wasn't there.
Catherine had a million questions, and she would soon get some very disturbing answers as officers sat her down at her kitchen table and explained why they were there.
Glenn had walked into a pharmacy. Glenn was hoping to get prescription pills, pain medication from this pharmacist without going to visit a doctor. Glenn had said he was a United States Marshal. This was caught on video. Glenn was dressed in SWAT attire and also stated that he had injured himself in the training and he needed pain relief immediately.
The pharmacist had not given Glenn his pills and had quickly called 911. Glenn Seymour's name was turned over to law enforcement, and they immediately started doing some digging.
We did his background investigation, determined that no law enforcement agency that we contacted had him in employment.
Officers discovered that while Glenn Seymour was an offshore oil rig electrician, he was not, nor had he ever been, a Homeland Security officer.
The moment that the officer told me that Glenn was never Homeland Security, it seemed like my whole world fell apart. My whole marriage was a lie.
I could tell that Catherine was basically taken by Glenn Seymour with his lies. I explained to Catherine that Glenn Seymour was not an officer of the law and that we had certain items in his house that we want to look for. She was very compliant. She signed a consent to search.
And as soon as I signed the paper, 5 guys rushed in the house and they started taking everything that belonged to Glenn.
Catherine watched in tears as the real officers carried Glenn's belongings right past him, where he sat handcuffed on the front lawn and flanked by police.
No way in the world did I expect to find what we uncovered. We retrieved tens of thousands of dollars worth of weapons, what people would deem assault weapons, tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition. Glenn Seymour also had homemade suppressors, which are silencers that mostly people use to muffle the sound of a rifle.
When one of the officers came from down the hall with a gun in his hand, I asked him where he got it from. He said it came from the nursery closet behind a duffel bag. The guns in the nursery were my baby sleeps. That dropped my heart.
Officers also gathered up the military plaques and medals Catherine had been so proud of.
So I go back out and make initial contact with Glenn Seymour. And my basic question to Glenn Seymour was, "You're a Marine?" And Glenn Seymour's answer was, "Yes, I was, but I was honorably discharged because of my wounds." And he pointed to his head area. And there was no scars, no marks to prove it. And I brought that to his attention.
And that was all it took for Glenn to finally reveal the truth.
Glenn broke down crying. He said, "I've never been in any armed forces. Those medals were from a dead Marine that died in a car wreck. And I ordered the certificates and dog tags offline." So my stomach just kind of sunk. Glenn Seymour was living a life of lies, and his wife was buying into it.
By this time, I didn't know what was real, what was lies, what happened, what didn't happen. I didn't know what to think.
Glenn Seymour was placed under arrest for impersonating a federal law enforcement agent. But before police put Glenn in a squad car, Catherine was given 5 minutes to talk to her husband.
He finally told me, he said, "I'm just so sorry. We'll figure it out when I get home."
Catherine was desperate for answers, and she knew that things looked bad for her husband. But Catherine had no idea how much worse things were about to get.
That phone call destroyed everything.
It was a blow to all of us.
I think Glenn thought it was the end, and he took a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
If you have a story of marriage gone wrong, go to investigation.discovery.com. On July 22, 2009, Catherine Blankenship was shocked when her husband, Glenn Seymour, was arrested for impersonating a law enforcement officer. But when Glenn called her from jail, he insisted he was innocent and blamed the police.
He said the cops are lying. I constantly asked him what was going on. He just didn't know. He had no clue. He wouldn't tell me anything. At the end of that conversation, I still felt like everything was unresolved. So I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but my gut was telling me not to.
Catherine wasn't sure she could trust her husband, especially when she found out he was giving federal agents an entirely different story.
Glenn admitted to over 100 impersonations of a police officer where he tried to gain some sort of favor. I think Glenn was thinking, I know I'm in trouble now. I think he was remorseful for it. I think he was remorseful for getting caught.
After 2 days in jail, Glenn was released on bail while he awaited trial.
I told Glenn when he got home from jail, as long as I knew everything and he'd be honest with me, then we could work on getting our marriage back on track. And he looked me in the eye and told me that I knew everything and there was no more secrets.
But Catherine kept pushing until her husband finally told her the devastating truth.
He said he was not in the Marines. He tried going and he failed the hearing test. Told me he didn't understand why he lied. He just wanted it so bad. That's something that he has always wanted in his heart and soul. So he thought that if he lied about it so long, that he would believe it.
Even though Glenn's entire past was made up, Catherine was still willing to stand by her husband.
I still loved him. I loved the man he was to me and the kids. The lies that Glenn told to me didn't make him the person he is. That didn't matter to me. That's not the man that was my husband, the father to my kids. I don't care if he was in Homeland Security or not. That's not the man I fell in love with. That's just something from the past.
Catherine and Glenn vowed to move forward. But as the days went by, Catherine realized putting the past behind them was going to be easier said than done.
He still made comments about he needed to get his guns back. He didn't feel like a man because he didn't have his guns to protect his family. I tell him, you don't need guns to protect your family. As long as you're here, that's protection. He didn't believe it.
Although Catherine was ready to forgive Glenn, the state of Louisiana wasn't as willing. Glenn would face 10 to 20 years in prison if convicted. So Catherine suggested that Glenn return to work to clear his head. But when he arrived back on the oil rig, Glenn found that news of his phony career had traveled fast.
Glenn called me, and he was about in tears. I could hear it in his voice. He was so embarrassed because there were two guys over there making fun of him. He said he felt like less of a man. I told him, men can be boys. You're a bigger person than that. Don't worry about it.
The heckling got the best of Glenn. 2 days later, Catherine got a heartbreaking phone call from the oil rig.
It was one of his bosses from work told me that Glenn had passed away. He had hung himself. And they tried to revive him. There was nothing that they could do. I was still in love with him. When I got that phone call, it seemed to really confirm all the lies that he couldn't live with anymore. I felt like my world just crashed.
Catherine and those investigating Glenn's case will never really know why Glenn created such a tangled web of lies.
Impersonating a Homeland Security special agent or Marine is a serious crime. I asked, why would you do this, Glenn? And he just said, I wanted my kids to look up to me. I want to be a hero to them. My basic answer to him was, Glenn, you're supplying food, you're supplying shelter. You are a hero to them.
I would often tell Glenn that being in the service isn't the reason I loved him, isn't the reason I fell in love with him. He was a wonderful father, husband. He worked for us. He lived for us. Being in the service, that didn't matter.
Today, Catherine Blankenship pours her energy into her children and takes things one day at a time. Although she feels ready to move forward, Catherine is not thinking about romance just yet.
I wish Catherine would find somebody to make her happy. She deserves it.
I'm single. I'm not dating. I figure whenever time is right, I'll be blessed with that person.
And when that time comes, Catherine will have learned a thing or two about trust.
I've learned that if your gut tells you something's not adding up, no matter what it is, check it out. You save yourself a whole lot of heartache that way.
When Joylyn Martinez wed the dreamy Robert Howard Bruce, she thought she'd died and gone to heaven.
Howard was the perfect guy. He wanted to take care of me and did all the little things that no one else had ever done.
He did anything that he could to win her love and her trust, and she fell for him.
But in time, life with Howard became a living hell.
Little by little, the slimy snake started to slither out.
And by the time Joylyn realized who her husband really was, she was caught up in a horrifying 20-year-old mystery.
Sounds like the boogeyman.
I was sick. Who is this guy that I'm married to that he could do something like this?
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. Joylyn Martinez had a lot of things on her mind in the summer of 2001, but starting a new relationship wasn't one of them.
I was recently divorced. I was a single mother raising 2 little boys, struggling on my own. I wasn't looking for anybody at that point. Wanted to concentrate on myself and my kids.
But one night that June, Joy's girlfriend convinced the young mother to take a break and go out for a night on the town.
I didn't want her to be home alone, being sad, so I asked Joylyn if she wanted to go out and just, go have a couple drinks somewhere, get her out of the house.
And that night would prove fateful. At a local Albuquerque, New Mexico bar, Joylyn was introduced to a tall drink of water named Robert Howard Bruce.
I had noticed him. He was a very good-looking man. He looked a lot like Ben Affleck. He came up to our side of the bar and bought me a drink, and we started talking.
As Joylyn sipped drinks with Howard, she had to admit she was having fun. She even gave him her number at the end of the night.
It was a very big moment for me to give him my phone number. I didn't think it would lead to anything. I still didn't want anything serious.
And Joylyn made that clear. But that didn't stop Howard from vigorously pursuing her.
He would show up with flowers. When he took me to dinner, it was always the high-end restaurants. It felt great having somebody spoil you. It was something I had never felt before.
He would buy her jewelry, he would buy her clothes. He really had an impact on her life as far as spoiling her, and she was at a time in her life when she needed that.
Howard also brought Joylyn on many of the frequent business trips he took as a salesman. But the icing on the cake, Howard was a devoted father of 3 children from a previous marriage.
He had his kids every other weekend. He did everything with his kids, fishing, hiking. He was a really good dad.
In fact, in the spring of 2002, Howard moved to Pueblo, Colorado, about 6 hours north of Joylyn, to be closer to his kids.
I agreed to try a long-distance relationship with him, just to see where it would go.
Howard visited Joylyn every other weekend, and despite the fact that he was 12 years her senior, he was always the life of the party.
When Howard would come into town, we'd meet somewhere, have some drinks, maybe some dancing. It was always a good time, always fun, always laughing.
But often, the drinking would prove too much for Joylyn, way too much. After experiencing several blackouts, she started to get seriously worried.
I could remember up to a certain point, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, well, when did we leave? I wouldn't remember anything afterwards. Howard said, it's probably because you didn't eat good last night. I even asked my doctor. He just kind of said, well, you know, it's age. It could be your diet. The doctor told me that. It put me at ease.
By April 2003, Howard and Joy Lynn had been dating for 2 blissful years. When Howard popped the question, Joy Lynn said yes. That fall, the couple wed in a gorgeous private Hawaiian ceremony.
The location, which was at a beautiful waterfall. I mean, it was a beautiful ceremony. It was nice.
She knew with Howard that he was financially stable, he was very good to her and the boys, and that she would have a very good life with him.
When the newlyweds returned home, they agreed they would continue their long-distance arrangement until Joy Lynn's children finished out the school year. And Joy Lynn made plans to go back to school herself.
Howard told me, after we get married, I don't want you to work, and I want you to go back to school and get your degree. I had always wanted to be a teacher, so I was very excited.
Joy Lynn felt lucky to have such a generous and understanding husband. But before long, he would seem like a stranger. Hidden beneath Howard's all-American exterior lurked ugly desires and terrible secrets. Secrets Joy Lynn would stumble onto years later in the local newspaper.
The headline got my attention enough to where I wanted to read it. As I'm reading this article, I was feeling sick. The hair on my body was standing up.
I froze, and I just remember thinking, oh my God, he was in my home.
It all clicked. My gut just told me that was him.
In the fall of 2003, Joy Lynn Martinez and her husband Howard Bruce were counting down the days until they could be together. Once Joy Lynn's 2 sons finished school in Albuquerque, the 3 would reunite with Howard in Pueblo, Colorado.
When I moved to Colorado, we had been actually married over a year. It was a hard move. I'm super close with my family.
Still, Joy Lynn was looking forward to joining her husband. But when she arrived with her sons that August, a man Joy Lynn hardly recognized greeted them.
Howard was very aggressive. His temper would go off for anything, and he would tell me horrible, mean things. He said, well, I support you and your kids now. And he kind of made it sound like me moving up there was putting a big strain on him financially. He was a completely different person.
Howard also went back on his promise to put Joy Lynn through school, claiming he couldn't afford tuition.
He would just say, well, it's just not right now. Don't worry, you'll get there. I was very upset.
By the time summer of 2005 rolled around, Joy Lynn had had enough. She decided to go back to Albuquerque with her boys and leave Howard behind.
I needed time away from him to figure out what I wanted to do and what I needed to do.
But Joy Lynn's absence only seemed to snap Howard back to his senses.
He put on the charm again, taking me to fancy dinners and the promise that when I went back that I was finally going to be able to register for school and go.
Howard won Joy Lynn over, and she agreed to give him another chance. That fall, she headed back to Pueblo. But just a few months later, Howard was right back to his controlling ways.
He was always calling her to find out where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. He was like a Jekyll and Hyde.
Joy Lynn's faith in her husband was wavering, and she found herself questioning everything.
I was looking for something in his car, and I reached under the seat, and I found a ski mask, a knife, and some gloves. When I first saw those items, something just didn't feel right. He came home. I was like, what is this? He said, we had a ton of pocket knives all around the house because of the boys. And he put the hat on and said, I don't wear it like a ski mat. I just wear it when I'm driving. And the gloves, they were like garden gloves. But then I thought, well, I was being ridiculous.
Joy Lynn's marriage seemed to be crumbling, and in May of 2006, she discovered a possible explanation.
Howard switched companies, so I went and got his book, an explanation of benefits from the employer, so I could find out what their policy was. Inside this book was a list of girls' names, addresses. The list was all different parts of the United States that he was traveling to. So I thought, oh my God, he's cheating on me. He's got a girlfriend in every town he goes to.
Joy Lynn immediately called Howard's cell and exploded.
I was like, I found your list of all your girlfriends, and how could you do this to me? He was like, what are you doing snooping through my stuff? Then he went from that to, no, that's not what that is. That list is old. I didn't really buy it. I was done with the relationship at that time. I had every intention of coming back to Albuquerque. I just had to wait a couple more months till my kids got out of school.
But before she left town, Joy Lynn made yet another awful discovery.
I got his video camera out and was going through tapes, and I came across a tape of him and me.
Joy Lynn couldn't believe her eyes as she watched a recording of Howard having sex with her without her knowledge.
In this video, I'm unconscious. I'm completely out of it. I don't remember it. I was sick. I couldn't believe what I was watching, and I couldn't believe he would do something like that to me. Howard called, and I don't even think I let him say anything. The first thing out of my mouth was, I saw your sick little tape.
Howard didn't react quite the way Joy Lynn expected.
It was kind of creepy. It was kind of like a laugh, like, oh, did it turn you on? Then it was like, oh, come on, Joy, we were drunk that night. He said, you didn't do anything that you wouldn't have normally done. I tell him, I can't even talk to you. I don't even want to hear your voice right now.
But that was only a glimpse into Howard's dark and twisted world. It was about to get much, much worse.
He was the all-American husband, and that was part of his camouflage.
I was scared. I didn't know what he might do to me.
In June 2006, after discovering a sex tape her husband Howard had made of her without her knowledge, Joy Lynn Martinez packed up her boys and moved back to Albuquerque. She left her husband behind in Colorado.
I was staying with my mom and dad, just trying to pick up the pieces. I wanted a divorce, but I didn't have money to divorce him.
Joy Lynn was heartbroken, and in August 2007, when her beloved grandmother suddenly passed away, Joy Lynn sunk even lower.
When I lost her, it hit me really hard. I was really close to her. And right away, when he found out he was, in Albuquerque, he was constant with the flowers and bringing me gifts, trying to tell me how much he loved me and how much he needed me.
Joy Lynn decided to take things one day at a time and put all thoughts of divorce on the back burner. Until the following year, when she found something that made her think twice.
I found a letter from an attorney going over some court dates that Howard needed to be at for a peeping Tom case. I'm floored because I'm like, peeping Tom. I confronted him on it.
Howard was ready with an explanation.
He said I was at work drinking a couple beers. I left, locked the keys in the office. I needed the bathroom, and I was peeing in the bush, and I got arrested. That's all it was. First I thought, okay, well, yeah, that's possible. But then I'm like, no, there's more to this.
2 months later, Joy Lynn's suspicions were heightened again. The morning of October 2nd, 2009, she casually picked up a newspaper.
I was looking for pages that had the crossword puzzles and stuff, and I came across the headline that got my attention. The headline said, "Cops back on the trail of the Etherman rapist." I had never heard of the Etherman rapist. As I'm reading this article, I was feeling sick. The hair on my body was standing up.
Joy Lynn read that the Etherman was Albuquerque's most prolific serial rapist. He'd been targeting young women from the early 1990s to around 2000. Detectives had been on the hunt for him for years to no avail.
He would stalk universities, look for young girls, and follow them home. Then he would break in, incapacitate them with some type of chemical, and then rape them. It was 19 years that he had been committing his crimes. We had determined that he had at least one victim in Pueblo, Colorado. Prior to that, I believe Albuquerque had somewhere around 19. Law enforcement in Albuquerque, they had conducted a long, methodical investigation. They had the DNA. They didn't know whose DNA it was. No one ever really reported any suspicious activity. So there was a lot of frustration.
Joy Lynn couldn't shake a feeling of dread as she read that the Etherman had also struck in Austin, Texas in May 2006. And that's when it hit her. Howard had been in Austin that month.
The timeline clicked. I knew when Howard moved to Albuquerque. I knew when he moved away. The rapes were happening during that time period. Everything clicked. I realized that that list of names wasn't girls that he was cheating on me with. It was probably potential victims. I mean, it all fit together.
But there was one important detail that didn't fit at all. Along with the article was a police sketch of the suspect.
The sketch to me didn't look like Howard. I even drew in a mustache and goatee like Howard wore and drew in some hair like Howard wore it so I could see if it looked like him. And to me, it didn't.
Still, Joy Lynn couldn't ignore all the other evidence that seemed to point directly at her husband.
I wrote down the phone number for the Crime Stoppers and I was gonna call, but I wanted to be 100% sure.
Howard was due in Albuquerque soon, and Joy Lynn nervously awaited his arrival, hoping his visit would end in closure, one way or another. But a shocking turn of events was about to change everything.
I've investigated homicides, sexual assaults, but nothing on this scale.
Something felt wrong. I knew something bad was gonna happen.
In the fall of 2009, Joy Lynn Martinez nervously awaited the arrival of her husband, Howard Bruce. It would not be a pleasant visit.
I knew Howard was an either man rapist. Even though I knew that that was him, I went back and forth trying to convince myself it wasn't him. That weekend was very hard to be with him. I was very nervous. Anytime he touched me, it made my skin crawl.
The following week, Joy Lynn breathed a sigh of relief when Howard returned to Colorado. She decided then and there to end her marriage.
I was gonna tell him that day that I wanted out, that I can't do it anymore. I had tried to call him and he wouldn't answer. Called him a couple times, he didn't answer.
Joy Lynn thought that was strange. Howard always took her calls.
And then I finally called his son and he said, I can't talk. They think my dad did something bad and I'm at the police station right now. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, what do you mean? What's going on?
Joy Lynn was stunned to hear that her husband was the prime suspect in the attempted murder of a Pueblo police officer.
And they couldn't find him. I didn't know what to think at that time. I was in panic mode.
One of our police officers went out to his garage and discovered a propane cylinder and rubber tubing going under the garage door. It was obvious that it had been set there intentionally by someone in an attempt to blow up his residence. Our officer notified the sheriff's department, notified the bomb squad. They asked him, who do you think could have done this? And the first person that came to mind was Howard Bruce.
The officer in question was the same one who had arrested Howard in his Peeping Tom case. He had also been set to testify against Howard that very day. But Howard never showed up. After 9 hours, police finally located his car in a parking lot. Howard was passed out in the front seat.
He was just out of it. He was under the influence of some drug or alcohol or something. But in the back seat of the car were 2 impressions made from the bottom of a propane cylinder.
Howard was immediately arrested and charged with 3 counts of criminal attempt to commit first-degree murder, intimidation of a witness, possession of an incendiary device, and third-degree criminal trespassing.
They found him and he was in custody, but I knew he did it, and to me it just validated everything.
2 days later, when 3 Pueblo police officers showed up at Joy Lynn's front door, she didn't hesitate to voice her suspicions.
I told them that I thought he was the either man rapist. I just couldn't doubt myself anymore.
With Joy Lynn's statement, detectives were immediately able to get a warrant for Howard's DNA. And a few weeks later, Robert Howard Bruce's name became national news when police announced a positive link between his DNA and the Ether Man rapist.
I think I basically just shut down. I couldn't understand how I could be married to someone who could be that person.
I couldn't believe that I knew this man for this many years and that he was capable of what he has done. It's just mind-boggling to me.
In July of 2010, Howard was convicted in the Peeping Tom case. The following year, he went to trial for attempted murder of a police officer. Joy Lynn had to testify as a character witness.
When I pointed Howard out when I was out on the witness stand, he had looked at me, smiled, winked, and blew me a kiss. And that made me sick.
In August 2011, Howard Bruce was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, attempted second-degree murder, and possession of an incendiary device. He was sentenced to 64 years in prison.
I was very relieved when I found out that he was convicted. It was finally over. I didn't have to worry about that anymore.
The following month, Howard received an additional 30 years after pleading guilty to a criminal attempt to commit sexual assault and first-degree burglary in yet another Colorado case.
He was the last guy to think would be looking in your back window. The last guy you'd expect to try and blow up a cop, and he was one of the most prolific serial rapists in history that I know of. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and he'll never see the light of day.
Recovering from her marriage to Howard Bruce has not been easy for Joy Lynn.
It's hard to get through something like this. I just think if God brings you to it, he'll bring you through it. Howard's not going to win. He's not going to destroy me.
I'm just sorry that my little sister got caught up and on this roller coaster ride. She needs to close this chapter in her life.
With help from friends and family, Joy Lynn is working on doing just that.
I think that she is going to be able to move past this. However, I don't think that she's going to be trusting anyone that she dates lightly. But after a situation like that, how can you?
Trust is a big issue with me, of course. I'm not completely untrusting. I just follow my gut more. If something doesn't feel right, I've learned my lesson. I ain't going there again.
It begins with a red light on the south side of Chicago, the kind of light no one remembers unless something goes wrong, the kind that hangs in the air for a few seconds too long, buzzing above cracked asphalt and frozen breath. December 1992, just past midnight, the city wrapped in that hard winter silence where even sirens sound tired, and a patrol car idling at the corner of 63rd and King Drive, its headlights washing over empty storefronts and boarded windows, when an officer notices a sedan drifting slightly over the line, not fast, not reckless, just enough to trigger instinct, just enough to justify a stop that would later be called routine, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of stop that happens 1,000 times a night and disappears into paperwork, except this one doesn't, because nothing about this night will ever fully disappear. The car pulls over slowly, too slowly, tires crunching against old salt and glass, exhaust curling into the cold air like smoke from a warning flare, and inside the vehicle a man grips the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles pale, eyes fixed forward. A man who looks unremarkable in every possible way, mid-30s maybe, dark jacket, no visible panic, no visible urgency. The kind of face you could pass on the street 100 times and never recall, and the officer approaches, flashlight sweeping the interior, radio murmuring in the background. A name is asked for, a license handed over, everything calm, procedural, safe, until the beam of light dips to the back seat and pauses, just a fraction of a second longer than it should. There is a smell, faint but wrong, metallic and sweet, something that doesn't belong inside a closed car on a winter night, something the officer can't quite place but will later replay again and again in his memory. And when he asks the driver to step out, the man complies without argument, without hesitation, as if he's been waiting for this moment, as if this red light has finally caught up to him after years of running in plain sight. At the station, the search begins, and what they find doesn't make sense at first. Not fully. Not yet. Just fragments, items that on their own are meaningless, gloves stiff with age, a length of cord, a Polaroid photo curled at the edges, the image faded but unmistakable, a young woman staring into the lens, fear frozen mid-breath, the date stamped in the corner reading June 1992, 6 months earlier. And suddenly the room changes, the air thickens, the paperwork stops being routine, and someone says the words every detective both waits for and dreads, this could be connected. Because June 1992 is a date that never healed in Chicago. That was the summer when 22-year-old Maria Alvarez vanished on her way home from a late shift at a diner near the Loop. A disappearance so sudden and clean it left no blood, no witnesses, no screams. Just an abandoned purse found near a bus stop and a city left staring at its own reflection in dark windows, asking how someone could disappear between point A and point B in a place this crowded, this loud, this alive. And for weeks her face filled the news. Black and white photos taped to street poles, her mother's voice cracking on television, begging anyone, everyone, to say something, to remember something, to help bring her home. They never did. The case went cold fast, colder than the lake in January, buried under gang shootings, political scandals, bodies that came with names and motives and timelines, and Maria Alvarez became another line in a binder marked unsolved. Another family forced to learn the language of waiting, of anniversaries that hurt more than holidays, of hope slowly mutating into something heavier, something quieter, something that never truly goes away, until a traffic stop threatens to rip it all open again. Detectives pull the old file from storage, dust rising as if the case itself resents being disturbed, yellowed pages, grainy photos, notes scribbled by officers who have since retired or died, and there it is, the Polaroid, almost identical to one found in the car, same camera type, same angle, same cold intimacy, the kind of image taken by someone who wanted to remember, who wanted proof. And suddenly the past feels close enough to touch, close enough to bleed. The man from the traffic stop denies everything. Of course, his voice steady, rehearsed. He says he found the photo at a flea market, says the gloves aren't his, says the cord is for camping, says a lot of things that sound reasonable if you don't listen too closely, if you don't notice the way his eyes never quite settle, the way he avoids certain dates, certain names, certain streets, and the detectives press harder, layering questions, revisiting timelines, pushing against the edges of his story until cracks begin to show, small at first, almost invisible, but real. They learn his name, Daniel Price, a delivery driver in the early 90s, routes all over the city, access to alleys and back doors and loading zones, someone who moved through Chicago without being seen, without being questioned, a ghost in a uniform, and suddenly Maria's last known movements take on new meaning, the diner's back in trance, the alley camera that wasn't working that night, the witness who thought they heard a van door slam but never reported it because it didn't seem important. At the time. It never seems important at the time. The community feels it before the police say a word, the old fear creeping back in, whispers traveling faster than official statements, people remembering how it felt in 1992 to double-check locks, to walk faster, to look over shoulders, and now there's a new word floating through the neighborhood, a word heavy with promise and danger, breakthrough, the idea that after all these years, after all this silence, the truth might finally be close enough to touch. But breakthroughs don't always lead where you think they will. Because for every question that finds an answer, 3 more seem to appear, and the deeper detectives dig into Daniel Price's past, the less linear the story becomes. Employment records that don't line up, addresses that overlap with other missing persons cases, reports dismissed at the time as runaways, transients, mistakes, and the scope of what they might be dealing with begins to stretch, to widen, to feel less like a single crime and more like a pattern that somehow slipped through the cracks of a city already overwhelmed. Evidence is retested with modern technology, fibers re-examined, fingerprints scanned through databases that didn't exist in 1992, and still, the answers refuse to come cleanly, results inconclusive, matches partial, just enough to keep hope alive but not enough to bring closure, and the frustration settles in like a second winter, colder than the first. Maria's family is notified, cautiously, carefully, words chosen to avoid promises, and her mother listens in silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot just past the detective's shoulder, as if she's learned not to look directly at hope anymore, because hope, she knows, can hurt more than the truth. Outside, Chicago keeps moving, traffic lights changing, buses running late, people living entire lives unaware that a moment from 30 years ago is clawing its way back into the present. that a routine traffic stop has shaken loose something buried deep beneath the city's skin, something that refuses to stay buried, something that might finally speak, if only someone can figure out how to listen. And as the interrogation room door closes, as the recorder clicks on, as Daniel Price exhales slowly and leans back in his chair, the detectives realize they're no longer just reopening a cold case. They're standing at the edge of something far more unsettling, a truth that may explain one disappearance, or may reveal how many more were never truly seen at all. The tape clicks on with a sound too small for what it's about to contain, a thin mechanical snap that seals the room and turns every breath into evidence, and Daniel Price sits under the harsh fluorescent light with his hands folded, posture calm, almost respectful, as if this were a meeting he had scheduled himself, as if he hasn't been pulled from a traffic stop into the center of a 30-year-old nightmare. And the detectives begin where they always do, with neutral ground, work history, addresses, routine questions designed to lull, to lower defenses, to make the truth feel less dangerous than the lie. Price talks easily about routes he used to drive, about warehouses that no longer exist, about streets that have changed names, his memory sharp when it suits him, detailed, almost nostalgic, and it's unsettling how normal it all sounds, how effortlessly he places himself into the past, into the Chicago of 1992, like a man flipping through an old photo album, pointing at familiar corners and saying, "Yes, I remember that, yes, I was there." And then they ask about June 14th, 1992. The pause is brief, but it's there, a microsecond where his eyes flick downward, where his jaw tightens, where the rhythm breaks just enough for trained ears to hear it, and he answers too quickly, says he doesn't remember specific days, says it was a long time ago, says people are asking him to recall details no one could reasonably expect, and one of the detectives nods, sympathetic, reasonable, because this is the dance. The slow approach, the careful tightening of the circle. They slide the Polaroid across the table. Not toward him. Just into view. The air in the room shifts. Price doesn't reach for it. Doesn't ask to see it closer. He looks at it the way someone looks at a memory they've already spent years trying not to revisit, and when he finally speaks, his voice is softer now, less confident. He repeats the flea market story, sticks to it like a lifeline, and the detectives let him, because sometimes lies reveal more in how they're protected than in how they're told. Outside the room, another team is already working backward, retracing his delivery routes with maps spread across desks, pins marking locations, red circles blooming across the city like a rash, and the pattern is uncomfortable, too neat, too consistent. Addresses clustering around transit corridors, late-night stops, industrial zones where cameras were scarce and witnesses even scarcer. Places where a person could disappear without sound. They pull reports from the early 90s, cases long dismissed, young women reported missing, some found days later, shaken but alive, others never found at all, and the similarities begin to stack up. Same age range, same time of night, same vague descriptions of a man who seemed helpful, authoritative, someone who offered a ride, directions, assistance, and vanished just as easily as he appeared. Back in the interrogation room, the questions turn sharper, less forgiving. They mention Maria Alvarez by name, watch his reaction closely, and this time there's no pause, no flicker, just a blankness that feels rehearsed, defensive, and dangerous. And when they ask if he ever met her, he says no, flat, final, as if the word itself is a door slammed shut. They show him a still image from a security camera near the diner, grainy, barely useful, a shadowed figure near the alley entrance at 12:47 a.m., the same time Maria clocked out, and they don't accuse, they don't push, they just ask if he recognizes the jacket, the posture, the way the man stands slightly angled, weight shifted to one leg, and Price leans forward for the first time, squints, shakes his head, says it could be anyone, says Chicago was full of men like that. Which is true. And that's the problem. The case file grows heavier by the hour, new pages added, old ones reread, and the word cold case starts appearing in internal emails, in hushed hallway conversations, in the tone of voices that know this is no longer just about Maria, that whatever they've stumbled into might stretch far beyond one disappearance, might force the city to confront something it missed, something it failed to see while it was busy surviving itself. Maria's mother agrees to come in. She hasn't been inside a police station since 1993, hasn't wanted to smell the disinfectant, hasn't wanted to hear the radios crackle, because for her those sounds mean promises that never came true. But she comes anyway, older now, smaller somehow, carrying a photo of her daughter like a talisman, and when they show her the Polaroid recovered from Price's car, she doesn't scream, doesn't cry. She just closes her eyes and exhales, as if a question she's been holding for decades has finally found a shape. She says it's Maria. She says she knows her daughter's face, the tilt of her head, the way fear looks on her, and the room goes quiet, because certainty like that doesn't need confirmation. It just lands, heavy and undeniable, and from that moment on, the investigation shifts, the tone hardens, the stakes climb, because now they're no longer chasing a theory, they're chasing a truth that has a name, a family, a history. Forensics takes another look at everything, reprocessing old evidence with new eyes, new machines, swabs that weren't possible in 1992, and still the results resist clarity, partial DNA profiles, degraded samples, enough to suggest contact but not enough to convict, and the frustration is palpable. Detectives pacing hallways, cups of cold coffee abandoned on desks, because they can feel how close they are, how infuriatingly close, and yet the finish line keeps moving. Daniel Price asks for a lawyer. It's a small moment, a predictable one, but it lands like a door slamming shut, and suddenly the interrogation room is empty. The chair pushed back, the tape recorder silent, and the momentum stalls, the case suspended in that dangerous space between suspicion and proof, where so many cold cases go to die a second time. The media catches wind of it anyway. A leak, a whisper, an off-the-record comment, and soon the headlines are back. Older now, but just as sharp. 1992 cold case reopened. Traffic stop leads to shocking discovery. Family hopes for answers after decades, and the community feels the weight of it. The resurfacing of old fears, old anger, people asking how someone like this could have moved among them unnoticed, how many chances there were to stop it, how many were missed. And as Daniel Price sits in a holding cell, staring at a concrete wall marked with names and dates scratched by other men waiting for their own truths to catch up with them, the city begins to realize that even if this case is solved, even if a killer is finally named, the damage has already rippled outward, touching lives that will never be listed in any report. Because some cold cases don't just haunt families. They haunt entire cities. And this one is only beginning to show how deep its shadows really go. The holding cell smells like old sweat and disinfectant, a place designed to erase time, and Daniel Price sits on the bench with his hands clasped, lawyer on the way, silence settling around him like a second skin, while upstairs the investigation refuses to slow, because once a cold case breathes again, it doesn't politely wait for legal schedules, it pushes, it demands, it forces people to look back at moments they thought were finished. Detectives spread out across the city, revisiting addresses tied to Price's past, apartment buildings with new paint and old bones, warehouses converted into condos, alleys now lit where once there was only darkness, and everywhere they go there's the same uneasy feeling that the ground beneath them remembers something the city tried to forget. Neighbors are interviewed, some reluctant, some eager, most unsure if what they remember matters anymore, stories half-formed, impressions without proof, a man who always seemed to be around late at night, a delivery truck idling too long, a smile that felt practiced, and none of it solid enough to stand alone, but together forming a shape no one likes. They find one woman who remembers more. She lives in a small apartment near an old industrial strip, her hair gray now, her hands trembling as she pours coffee she doesn't touch, and she says that in the summer of 1991, a man in a delivery uniform offered her a ride when her bus broke down, said he was heading her way anyway, said it was no trouble, and she remembers how clean the truck was, how normal he seemed, how close she came to saying yes, and how something, a voice she still can't name, told her to step back, to wait, to let him drive off alone. She watched the truck disappear down the street. She never reported it, never thought to, because nothing happened, because survival doesn't feel like evidence, and when detectives show her a photo of Daniel Price taken years later, she doesn't hesitate, doesn't second-guess. She just nods slowly and says, "That's him." I'm sure of it. The statement goes into the file, another thread woven into a tapestry that's starting to feel too heavy to lift, and the question now isn't whether Price was dangerous, it's how many times he was given an opportunity and didn't need to force anything at all. Back at headquarters, analysts overlay timelines, mapping Price's employment history against missing persons reports, and the alignment is disturbing, spikes in disappearances during months when he worked certain routes, gaps when he was out of town, patterns that don't scream guilt but whisper it persistently, relentlessly, and those whispers are getting harder to ignore. The lawyer arrives mid-afternoon, crisp suit, controlled tone, and suddenly every question needs to be weighed, every word chosen, the energy shifting from pursuit to chess match, and Price, now advised, becomes quieter, answers shorter, eyes calculating, and when they ask about other women, other photos, other possible victims, he simply says no comment, over and over, a wall built of 2 words and legal rights. For Maria's family, the waiting starts all over again. They sit in their living room with the television off, phones nearby but silent. The house filled with memories that never left, and now the wound that scabbed over years ago is raw again, exposed to hope and fear in equal measure, and Maria's mother keeps replaying that Polaroid in her mind, the look on her daughter's face, the certainty she felt, and she wonders if knowing is worse than not knowing at all. The media pressure intensifies. Reporters dig into old archives, unearthing footage from 1992, grainy interviews with officers long retired, headlines that promised answers and delivered none, and the story takes on a life of its own. Speculation filling the gaps where facts refuse to settle, talk radio buzzing with theories, callers arguing about guilt and innocence, about police failure, about how a city can lose track of its own people. Then the lab calls. A partial DNA profile recovered from the gloves found in Price's car shows a familial link to evidence collected in another unsolved case from 1993, a woman named Denise Carter, found alive but traumatized, unable to identify her attacker. Her case eventually shelved due to lack of leads, and now, decades later, the connection snaps into place. Not enough for court, not enough for charges, but enough to confirm what detectives have suspected all along, that this isn't an isolated incident, that the story they're uncovering is bigger, darker, and far more complex than a single name in a single file. They reopen Denise Carter's case. She's tracked down in a different state, living under a different last name, and when detectives explain why they're there, her hands start to shake the same way they did 30 years ago because trauma, like cold cases, doesn't age out, it just waits. And she tells them about the man who picked her up when she was stranded, about how he talked calmly, reassuringly, about how fast everything changed, how she survived by chance, by compliance. By luck, she never trusted again. When they show her Daniel Price's photo, she doesn't say anything at first. She just stares. And then she says yes. Her identification is emotional, powerful, but legally fragile. Memories decades old, vulnerable to attack in court, and still, it adds weight, gravity, the kind that bends the investigation further in one direction, and detectives feel the urgency spike, because now they know they're racing not just against time, but against the possibility that the truth may never fully harden into something unbreakable. They request a search warrant for Price's former residences. The first house is long gone, replaced by a parking lot, the second renovated beyond recognition, but the third, a modest place on the edge of the city, still stands, and as they dig through crawl spaces and pull up floorboards, they find nothing conclusive, no remains, no clear trophies, just the unsettling absence of innocence, the feeling that whatever was here has already been moved, hidden, erased with care. In the basement, though, they find something else. A series of scratches on a concrete wall, shallow but deliberate, marks that don't look random, that don't look like damage from storage or repairs, and while they can't prove what caused them, everyone in the room knows what they resemble, knows how often basements appear in stories that never end well, and the silence there is thick enough to taste. Night falls, and Chicago lights up as it always does. Traffic flowing, trains rattling overhead, life insisting on itself, and somewhere in the city a man sits in a cell, protected by the law, surrounded by suspicion, and entirely aware that the past he thought he buried is now knocking from every direction. The detectives meet late, exhaustion etched into their faces, and someone asks the question no one wants to answer. What if this is all we ever get? What if we know but can't prove? What if this case joins the long list of truths that exist without justice and no one responds, because everyone in the room understands how real that possibility is? Outside, a light rain begins to fall, washing streets that once carried footsteps no one followed, and for the first time in years, the city feels like it's holding its breath, waiting to see if this cold case will finally crack open, or if it will remind everyone of the most painful truth of all, that sometimes the answers come too late, and sometimes they don't come clean at all. And as Daniel Price lies back on the thin mattress of his cell, staring at the ceiling, listening to distant doors slam and voices echo, one thing is certain: whatever happens next, the silence he depended on for decades is gone, replaced by a noise he can't shut out anymore, the sound of a city remembering. Morning breaks over Chicago without ceremony, gray light bleeding into streets that don't care what happened the night before, and inside the building the case keeps grinding forward, fueled by exhaustion and a sense that momentum, once lost, may never return, because cold cases have a way of slipping back into silence if you loosen your grip for even a moment. Detectives arrive early, jackets still damp from the rain, faces drawn, eyes already scanning reports they've read twice, 3 times, looking for angles they might have missed, phrases that suddenly mean something different now that a suspect has a name and a face and a lawyer. Daniel Price is transferred to a different holding facility, a quieter one, fewer eyes, fewer leaks, and the move itself becomes a point of tension because every hour he sits without charges is another hour the case could fracture under its own weight. Prosecutors are cautious, almost painfully so, reminding everyone that suspicion is not proof, that patterns are not convictions, that a courtroom doesn't care how dark a story feels if the evidence can't stand on its own legs. The word premature is used more than once, and each time it lands like a slap. The detectives push back with what they have: timelines, witness identifications, partial DNA links, recovered photographs, but they know it's still a fragile structure, impressive from a distance, shaky up close, and the fear isn't just that Price will walk, it's that he'll walk knowing exactly how close they came, exactly where the gaps are, exactly how to stay silent forever. They decide to revisit the diner. It's changed owners twice since 1992, but the bones are the same: the narrow back hallway, the service door that opens onto the alley, the angle where the light doesn't quite reach, and standing there again, detectives try to see what Maria Alvarez saw on her last night: tired feet, apron folded under her arm, thoughts already halfway home, unaware that this ordinary moment is about to become the most analyzed minute of her life. They talk to former employees who still live nearby, people who worked the late shift back then, and one man remembers something he never told anyone because he didn't think it mattered, because it seemed too small. He remembers a delivery truck parked where it didn't belong. Not blocking anything, not causing trouble, just sitting there longer than necessary. Engine off, lights dark, and he remembers thinking it was odd, but not odd enough to call anyone, not odd enough to step outside and look closer, and as he talks, his voice drops, guilt creeping in, because now he understands that the line between noticing and acting can stretch into decades of regret. They mark the spot on the map. It lines up. Every small confirmation tightens the circle, and yet the center remains frustratingly empty, because Daniel Price refuses to fill it with words, and the law protects his silence, like a fortress. His lawyer files motions, challenges the traffic stop, questions the legality of the search, plants seeds that could poison the case before it ever reaches a jury, and the detectives feel the pressure mount, knowing that a single procedural mistake could erase years of work in a matter of minutes. They try a different approach. A second interview, this time not confrontational, not accusatory, but reflective, almost gentle, and Price agrees, perhaps out of boredom, perhaps out of confidence, perhaps because part of him wants to talk. They sit across from him without photos, without files, just 2 men and a recorder, and they ask about his life now, how he sleeps, what he dreams about, whether the past ever intrudes. Price smiles faintly and says everyone has things they don't talk about, things they keep locked away, and for a moment the room feels less like an interrogation and more like a confession waiting to happen. They mentioned Chicago in the 90s, how chaotic it was, how easy it was for people to slip through cracks, and Price nods, says it was a different time, says things were simpler, looser, and there's something in his tone, a note of nostalgia that doesn't sit right, that feels sharpened at the edges. And when they ask him if he ever felt invisible back then, he pauses, considers, and says maybe everyone did. The conversation drifts, circles, comes back again, and when they gently mention Maria's name, not as an accusation but as a fact, a young woman who never came home, Price exhales slowly, closes his eyes for a beat, and says he's sorry for her family, that no one deserves that kind of pain, and it's the closest thing to emotion he's shown since the arrest, a moment that sends a ripple through the room, because sympathy can be genuine, or it can be camouflage, and telling the difference is its own kind of torture. After the interview, the detectives argue quietly in the hallway, replaying every word, every pause, every shift in tone, some convinced they're getting close, others warning against reading meaning into nothing, because wanting a breakthrough doesn't make one real. The recorder is logged, the tape filed, and another day slips toward evening without the clean answer everyone is desperate for. Meanwhile, the search expands beyond the city. Old delivery logs reveal out-of-state routes, neighboring counties, even brief stints across state lines, and cold case units in other jurisdictions are contacted, cautious emails sent, names exchanged, files requested, and slowly, reluctantly, other departments begin to respond, some with cases that feel uncomfortably familiar, others with nothing at all, and the scope of what might be unfolding stretches wider, threatening to overwhelm the original investigation. One file stands out. A missing person report from 1990. A woman named Lisa Monroe, last seen near a highway rest stop outside the city. Her case never linked to Chicago because she wasn't from there, because she was passing through, because no one thought to connect the dots, and now her timeline overlaps with Price's travel records, another coincidence that doesn't prove anything but refuses to be ignored. Her family is contacted, cautiously, and the reaction is a mix of hope and fury, hope that answers might finally exist, fury that they might have been there all along, buried in someone else's paperwork. The weight of expectation grows heavier by the day. Command staff wants updates. Prosecutors want clarity. The media wants certainty. Families want closure. And the detectives are caught in the middle, holding a case that feels alive and slippery, like trying to carry water in their hands without spilling a drop. They know that if they rush, they could lose everything, but if they hesitate, the window may close forever. Late one night, long after most of the building has gone quiet, a detective stays behind, rereading Maria's original missing persons report, the language dated, the assumptions painfully obvious, notes about her background, her job, the subtle judgments that colored early investigations in ways no one talked about openly back then, and the realization hits hard that even without malice, the system failed her, failed to treat her disappearance with the urgency it deserved, and that failure echoes now, complicating everything. Outside, a siren wails briefly and fades, another incident, another story, and the detective closes the file, rubs his eyes, and wonders how many cold cases are really about monsters hiding in the dark, and how many are about moments when no one looked hard enough, fast enough, or cared loudly enough. As midnight approaches, Daniel Price is returned to his cell, the routine unbroken, the walls indifferent, and he lies awake listening to the building settle, pipes clanking, footsteps echoing, and for the first time since his arrest, he asks a guard what day it is. The question is casual, almost curious, but it lands heavy because time, the thing that protected him for so long, is now the very thing closing in. Somewhere across the city, Maria Alvarez's mother sits at her kitchen table, the Polaroid copy folded carefully in her hands, staring at a face that hasn't aged in 30 years, wondering if the truth, when it finally arrives, will feel like relief or like another kind of loss. And as the city slips into the uneasy quiet before dawn, one thing becomes painfully clear to everyone involved, that this cold case is no longer just about what happened in 1992, it's about what the city allowed to fade, what it's willing to confront now, and whether the noise of the present will be enough to finally break the silence of the past. The 5th day since the traffic stop opens with a quiet that feels staged, the kind of calm that never lasts, and inside the task force room the walls are now layered with maps, timelines, faces, strings crossing like fractures in glass, because once you start pulling at the past it never comes apart cleanly. It splinters, it multiplies, and the detectives are beginning to understand that the real danger isn't failing to prove one crime. It's uncovering too many and being unable to answer for all of them. The prosecutor sits in on the morning briefing, arms crossed, eyes sharp, listening without interruption as the detectives lay out what they've built so far. Witness identifications, circumstantial overlaps, behavioral patterns, partial forensic connections, and when they finish, the room waits, because this is the moment where hope either gains a spine or collapses under its own weight. The prosecutor finally speaks, slow and deliberate, saying what everyone already knows but no one wants to hear, that none of this, as it stands, is enough, that it paints a picture. Yes, but pictures don't put people away, and the law demands something harder, something cleaner, something that survives cross-examination and skepticism. They ask what that something might be. A body, he says, or a confession, or a piece of evidence, so direct it leaves no room for interpretation. Silence follows, thick and uncomfortable, because bodies don't always appear just because you ask them to. Confessions are rare and fragile, and evidence that clean almost never survives 3 decades of neglect and decay. Still, the directive is clear: keep digging, keep pushing, and do it fast, because once the public narrative outruns the legal one, the case becomes radioactive. The detectives split up again, chasing leads that feel more desperate than promising, re-interviewing witnesses who already said everything they could remember, hoping time has loosened something, softened resistance, sharpened memory, and sometimes it does. A former warehouse worker recalls a delivery driver who used to linger after hours, offering cigarettes, making small talk that felt forced, and when shown Price's photo, he hesitates, then nods, unsure but uneasy, another almost, another not quite, another brick that doesn't fully lock into place. Meanwhile, the forensic team takes a gamble. They re-examine the Polaroid itself, not the image but the object, the paper, the chemicals, the fingerprints too degraded to use traditionally, and with new techniques they isolate trace elements from the edges, fibers that suggest the photo was stored for years in a damp environment, possibly underground, possibly a basement, and while that alone proves nothing, it aligns disturbingly well with the marks found in Price's former home, the scratches on the concrete wall that no one can stop thinking about. A warrant is requested to re-excavate that basement. The owners aren't happy, but the law allows it, and by afternoon the space is once again torn open, concrete chipped away, soil sifted carefully, methodically, every scoop watched, every fragment catalogued, the air heavy with dust and expectation, and hours pass with nothing to show for it, fatigue settling in, hope thinning, until a technician finds something small and unmistakable, a fragment of fabric caught beneath an old support beam, synthetic, dark blue, consistent with a diner uniform. From the early 90s. The room freezes. It's not a body. It's not definitive. But it's real, tangible, physical, and for the first time since the stop, the investigation has something it can hold in its hands. The fabric is bagged, logged, rushed to the lab, and word spreads through the building faster than protocol would like, the energy shifting instantly, adrenaline cutting through exhaustion, because now the question is no longer if they're close, it's how much closer they're willing to get. Daniel Price is informed of the new development through his lawyer. His reaction is muted, almost bored, a slight lift of the eyebrows, a comment about how old buildings collect all kinds of debris, how people read too much into coincidence, and his lawyer echoes the sentiment, dismissing the find as contamination, as conjecture, as a desperate attempt to build a case where none exists. But the detectives notice something else, a tension in Price's shoulders that wasn't there before, a restlessness, fingers tapping against the table, and they file it away, another non-evidence detail that nevertheless feels important. The lab results come back late that night. The fabric matches the material used by the diner where Maria worked, a discontinued supplier, a specific weave that narrows the possibilities sharply, and while it still doesn't place Maria definitively in that basement, it does something almost as powerful. It destroys the idea that her disappearance left no physical trace, that she simply vanished into thin air. She was somewhere, and that somewhere is starting to feel uncomfortably specific. The prosecutor agrees to draft a preliminary case. Not charges yet, but preparation, contingency, groundwork, and it's a quiet victory, understated, but significant, because it means the case has crossed an invisible line from curiosity to credibility. The detectives push harder, knowing the clock is ticking now, not just on public patience, but on Price's legal maneuvering, and they request another interview, this time with the evidence laid bare. Price agrees again. He sits down, composed but less relaxed, the calm of a man who knows the walls are closing in but refuses to show it, and they place the evidence photos on the table one by one, the Polaroid, the gloves, the cord, the fabric fragment, and finally, they show him a map, red dots marking locations tied to him, to missing women, to moments that never found conclusions. They don't accuse. They let the image speak. For a long moment, Price says nothing. Then he laughs softly, a sound that doesn't belong in the room, and says people love patterns, says they see shapes where there are none, says he's being punished for being unlucky, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the detectives let him talk, let him dig, because sometimes deflection reveals more than denial. He talks about how easy it is to rewrite the past, how memories change, how the truth becomes whatever people need it to be, and there's a bitterness in his voice now, a resentment that feels older than the arrest itself. They ask him directly if Maria Alvarez was ever in his truck. He looks at them, really looks, and for a split second something flickers, not fear, not guilt exactly, but calculation, and then it's gone, replaced by indifference, and he says no, firmly, confidently, and asks if they're done yet. The interview ends without a confession. But it doesn't end without impact. Because as Price is led away, one of the detectives notices a faint smudge on his sleeve, dark, oily, and when it's tested later, it turns out to be residue from the same industrial compound found on the fabric fragment, a chemical used in warehouse flooring treatments common in the early 90s but rare now. Another coincidence, another alignment, another thread tightening around a man who insists he's just unlucky. The media explodes. Leaks about the fabric hit the press, headlines sharpen, speculation hardens into assumption, and the community feels the shift, the tone changing from cautious hope to near certainty, people talking as if the case is already solved, as if justice is just a formality waiting to be signed, and the detectives worry, because they know how fragile this all still is, how quickly certainty can crumble under scrutiny. Maria's mother is told about the fabric. She listens, nods, asks careful questions, and then she cries for the first time since the investigation reopened. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that soak into the sleeve of her sweater, because for her this is proof of something she's known in her bones for decades, that her daughter didn't just disappear, that something happened, somewhere, at the hands of someone who walked free for far too long. As night settles again, the task force stays late, pushing through fatigue, chasing final angles, because everyone can feel it now, the case leaning forward, teetering on the edge of something irreversible, and in his cell, Daniel Price lies awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, reevaluating silence, realizing that time, once his greatest ally, has begun to betray him. Outside, Chicago breathes, unaware of the calculations being made in rooms it will never see, unaware of how close it is to either a reckoning or another chapter of unfinished business, and somewhere between those two outcomes, the truth waits, patient, stubborn, and increasingly difficult to ignore. By the sixth day, the case has a pulse of its own, something restless and demanding, and the task force moves like a single organism driven by caffeine and unfinished thoughts, because once evidence starts to accumulate, it changes the way everyone breathes, the way questions are asked, the way silence is interpreted. The fabric fragment sits sealed in its bag like a loaded weapon, small enough to dismiss, heavy enough to tilt the entire investigation, and every decision now carries the quiet threat of consequence. The prosecutor calls for restraint. Leaks have gotten sloppy, the narrative drifting ahead of the facts, and there's concern that a jury pool is already forming opinions before a single charge is filed. Orders come down to tighten information flow, to lock the doors on speculation, but it's too late to put the story back in the bottle. Chicago has tasted the idea of resolution, and it doesn't let go easily. People want a name, a face, a reason, something that makes the randomness of the past feel organized, survivable. Detectives return to the basement site with fresh eyes, slower hands, because sometimes urgency creates blind spots, and blind spots are where cases go to die. Soil samples are re-examined, moisture patterns mapped, and a geologist is consulted to estimate how long the ground beneath the foundation has been disturbed, and the conclusion is maddeningly precise and useless at the same time. That something happened there decades ago, but not long enough, not deep enough, to guarantee what everyone hopes and fears it means. The absence becomes its own kind of evidence. If Maria was there, if others were there, then someone cleaned, moved, erased, and that implies planning, control, a timeline of actions that extends far beyond impulse. The investigation pivots subtly, less focused on what might still be found, more focused on what was deliberately removed, and that shift opens a new avenue. Disposal sites, routes out of the city, places a delivery driver could reach without drawing attention. Old landfill records are pulled. Some no longer exist. Some were capped years ago. Some were used briefly and abandoned, and cross-referencing them with Price's routes produces a short list that feels too short, as if the city itself is resisting the search, hiding its own scars beneath layers of paperwork and progress. Still, teams are dispatched, permissions requested, ground-penetrating radar scheduled, and the logistics alone feel overwhelming, because digging into the past is expensive, slow, and politically inconvenient. Inside the jail, Daniel Price senses the shift. He asks for reading material, for news clippings, for updates, small requests that seem harmless but reveal a growing awareness that the world outside his cell is moving without him, shaping a story he can no longer control. His lawyer reassures him, reminds him of the weaknesses, the lack of a body, the fragility of memory, the difference between suspicion and certainty, but even confidence has limits, and those limits start to show in the way Price sleeps less, eats less, stares longer at nothing. A guard mentions Maria Alvarez's name in passing. It's casual, unintentional, but it lands hard, and Price snaps back, tells him to watch what he says, and the outburst is reported, logged, another small crack in the carefully maintained image of calm indifference. The detectives read the report and exchange looks, because emotion, when it finally leaks out, rarely does so by accident. They bring in a profiler. Not to declare anything definitive, not to label Price, but to contextualize what they're seeing, the patterns of control, the long silence, the apparent comfort with risk, and the profiler talks about offenders who rely on normalcy, on jobs that grant access, on trust that isn't earned but assumed, and as she speaks, the room feels colder, because every description seems to echo something they've already uncovered. She warns them about one thing in particular. If Price has been carrying this for decades, if his identity is wrapped up in what he's gotten away with, then pressure alone may not break him. What might break him is the idea that his story will be told without him, that the narrative will move on, that he will be reduced to a footnote in someone else's version of events. Control, she says, isn't just about the act, it's about ownership of the truth. The detectives adjust their strategy again. They stop pushing for admissions and start talking about legacy, about how cases are remembered, about how families piece together lives from fragments, and they let Price overhear, in controlled ways, discussions about what will be said publicly if charges are filed, about how many cases might be linked, about how many names might eventually be associated with his. It's risky, close to manipulation, but within bounds, and it's designed to create discomfort, to loosen the grip he has on his silence. At the same time, another development quietly reshapes the landscape. A retired officer contacts the task force after seeing a news segment. He worked patrol in the early 90s and remembers responding to a call near one of Price's former routes. A woman found wandering, disoriented, refusing medical help, insisting she just wanted to go home. The report was minimal. No follow-up. No name attached that matches current records. But the officer remembers the look in her eyes, the way she flinched when a delivery truck passed, and he's carried that image longer than he realized. The search for her begins. It takes days, false leads, name changes, and finally a match through a social services database, a woman living quietly under a different identity, and when detectives reach her, she's hesitant, guarded, tired of being remembered only for something she survived. They explain carefully, gently, and when they show her Daniel Price's photo, her reaction is immediate and visceral, a step backward, a hand to her mouth, a whispered no that doesn't mean denial. She agrees to talk. Her account is fragmented, shaped by time and trauma, but consistent in ways that matter. The truck, the calm voice, the sudden shift, the sense that she escaped because something distracted him, because luck intervened. She never reported it formally, never wanted to be pulled into an investigation, never wanted to relive it, and now, decades later, she's being asked to do exactly that, for a woman she never met, for a truth she thought she'd outrun. Her statement strengthens the case emotionally, but legally it's still vulnerable, another memory stacked against a man protected by time. The prosecutor listens, nods, and reiterates the same brutal truth. Without a body or a confession, this remains a gamble, and the higher the stakes, the more cautious the system becomes. Pressure builds from another direction. City officials want updates, concerned about optics, about reopening wounds, about what it says if this all collapses. There's talk of independent review boards, of cold case audits, of systemic failure, and suddenly the investigation isn't just about one suspect, it's about an era, about choices made and not made, about whose disappearances were prioritized and whose were quietly absorbed into background noise. Late that night, the ground-penetrating radar pings. Not conclusively, not definitively, but enough to suggest anomalies at a former landfill site 30 miles outside the city, a place Price could reach easily, a place that operated briefly in the early 90s before being shut down. The images are fuzzy, shapes indistinct, but they trigger a response that feels almost primal, because this is the moment every cold case unit both longs for and fears, the moment when theory might finally collide with reality. Permits are requested. Lawyers argue timelines. The site is secured. And as word of the potential search leaks, the city holds its breath again, because now the question is no longer whether someone is guilty, it's whether the past is about to surface in a way no one can ignore. Daniel Price is informed that a search is planned. For the first time, his composure cracks visibly. He asks how long it will take. He asks what they think they'll find. He asks who will be there. The questions come quickly, layered with an edge he hasn't shown before, and when his lawyer tries to steer him back into silence, Price waves him off, says he just wants to understand, and the detective across from him notes it quietly, that the man who once claimed indifference is suddenly very interested in outcomes. The night stretches on. Teams prepare equipment. Families wait by phones. Detectives try to sleep and fail. And in the space between certainty and doubt, between hope and dread, the case seems to lean forward again, pulled by something buried and stubborn and heavy. Somewhere beyond the city lights, a patch of ground waits, undisturbed for decades, holding whatever it's been asked to hold, and as dawn approaches, Chicago braces itself for the possibility that this cold case is about to change temperature forever, for better or worse, in ways no one can fully predict. Dawn comes pale and cold, the kind of morning that feels reluctant to exist, and at the edge of the former landfill the task force gathers in silence, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, breath fogging the air as if the ground itself is exhaling. Yellow tape flutters weakly in the wind, cameras kept at a distance for now, and the hum of equipment cuts through the quiet, because once a search like this begins there is no turning back, no way to undo whatever is about to surface. Ground-penetrating radar grids the site in neat, unforgiving lines, screens glowing with ghostly shapes that suggest disruption, voids where the soil remembers being moved, and technicians mark the anomalies carefully, knowing that hope can bias even the most disciplined eyes. Shovels are held back at first, replaced by measured excavation, layers peeled away inch by inch, because if something is there, it deserves to be found intact, and if nothing is there, the absence will speak just as loudly. Hours pass. The work is slow, methodical, cruel in its patience, and as the sun climbs higher, the smell of turned earth mixes with diesel and coffee, the ordinary sense of labor clashing with the extraordinary weight of expectation. Detectives watch, hands on hips, notebooks untouched, because this is the rare moment when the case leaves the realm of theory and enters the physical world, where answers are either present or not, where there's no room for interpretation. The first call comes just before noon. A technician signals, voice tight, and everyone moves closer, forming a loose circle around a shallow pit, and what they see isn't a body, not yet, but something unmistakably human, a fragment of bone, weathered, discolored, and suddenly the sight feels smaller, heavier, as if the air itself has thickened. The fragment is photographed, bagged, catalogued, and the work stops briefly, protocols kicking in, because once human remains are suspected, everything changes. News reaches headquarters within minutes. The prosecutor is notified. The medical examiner is called. Maria Alvarez's family is informed, carefully, gently, words chosen to protect and prepare at the same time, and Maria's mother listens without speaking, the phone pressed to her ear, the world narrowing to a single point of sound. She asks one question, the only one that matters to her. Is it her? And the answer, for now, is honest and devastating. They don't know yet. At the jail, Daniel Price is told that human remains may have been found. He doesn't speak at first. His jaw tightens, his eyes fix on the floor, and when he finally looks up, his expression is unreadable, caught somewhere between resignation and calculation. He asks what kind of remains, how old, how sure they are, and when he's told it's too early to say, he nods slowly, as if filing the information away, and asks for water. The guard later reports that Price didn't drink it. Back at the site, excavation resumes with renewed focus, careful not to disturb what might be fragile, what might hold answers people have waited decades to hear. More fragments appear, teeth, a length of bone that suggests a limb, personal effects reduced to corroded metal and fabric threads, and the realization settles in that this is no accident, no coincidence, no natural deposit. Someone was placed here. Someone was meant to stay hidden. The medical examiner arrives mid-afternoon, kneels in the dirt, examines what's been uncovered, and gives a preliminary assessment that ripples through the group. Adult female, time of burial consistent with early 90s, cause of death impossible to determine at this stage, and suddenly the case has crossed a line no one can step back from. This is no longer about speculation. This is about remains in the ground and a family waiting for a name. Evidence is rushed to the lab. Dental records are requested. Missing persons databases are reopened and cross-referenced again, and while everyone wants this to be Maria, there's a quieter, darker fear threading through the work, that it might be someone else entirely, someone whose name hasn't been spoken in years, someone whose family may not even know where to start looking for answers. The media gets closer. Helicopters circle. Reporters push against barriers. Headlines begin to form before confirmation exists, and the task force struggles to maintain control, to keep the story from outrunning the science, because once a narrative hardens, it's nearly impossible to soften again. The prosecutor orders a temporary media blackout on details, knowing it won't hold for long, knowing that the city is hungry for resolution. Late in the afternoon, a personal item is recovered. A small pendant, tarnished but intact, engraved with initials on the back, and when a detective sees it, his breath catches because he remembers it from a photo in Maria Alvarez's file, a gift from her mother, something she wore every day. The pendant is photographed, sealed, and sent for verification, but the emotional weight hits immediately because objects like that don't lie, they wait. Maria's mother is asked to come in. She arrives with her sister, hands trembling, eyes steady, and when they show her the pendant behind glass, she doesn't hesitate, doesn't ask to touch it. She just nods and says yes, that's hers, that's what I gave her. And the room goes very still, because in that moment the years collapse, the waiting condenses into a single breath, and the truth, partial and brutal, finally steps into the light. Daniel Price is informed again, this time of the pendant. He closes his eyes. Not for long. Just long enough to register something deeper than surprise. When he opens them, his voice is flat, controlled, and he says nothing, but his lawyer leans in, whispers urgently because the landscape has shifted dramatically, irreversibly, and silence, once a shield, is now a risk. The prosecutor moves quickly. Emergency motions are filed. Preparations for charges begin in earnest because now there is a body, a link, a narrative that juries understand in their bones, and while science still needs to confirm what grief already knows, the case has gained a gravity that can't be argued away as coincidence. As evening approaches, the site is shut down for the night, lights erected to guard what remains, and the city watches from a distance, suspended between relief and horror, because finding Maria answers one question but opens many more: how she died, how she got there, and whether she was alone. In his cell, Daniel Price sits on his bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, the weight of decades pressing in on him all at once. He asks for his lawyer again, and this time there's urgency in his voice that wasn't there before, a crack in the control that defined him for so long. Outside, Maria Alvarez's mother returns home carrying a truth she's waited half her life to hear, a truth that brings no comfort, only clarity, and as she places her hand on her daughter's old photograph, she whispers her name, not as a question anymore, but as a statement. The ground beyond the city lies quiet under the floodlights, holding what it has already given up and what it may still be hiding, and everyone involved understands now that this cold case has passed the point of no return, that whatever happens next will echo far beyond one arrest, one confession, or one grave. Because when the past finally surfaces, it rarely comes alone. Confirmation arrives not with drama but with paperwork, a sequence of calls and signatures that carry more weight than any headline ever could, dental records matching, timestamps aligning, the medical examiner's voice steady as she says the name everyone has already spoken in their heads: Maria Alvarez identified, recovered, no longer missing, and the word recovered feels wrong, too gentle for what it represents. But it's the word the system uses when the dead are finally brought back into the light. The building absorbs the news quietly, detectives nodding, some exhaling for the first time in days, others tightening up, because identification is not an ending, it's a beginning, the moment when grief hardens into a demand for answers. The cause of death remains undetermined, the remains too degraded to tell a clean story, but there are signs of restraint, subtle markers that suggest control, intent, and a timeline that points back toward the summer of 1992 with brutal consistency. The prosecutor authorizes the charges:
kidnapping,
murder, abuse of a corpse. The words look heavy on the page, final in a way nothing else has been, and the warrant is prepared, reviewed, re-reviewed, because after decades of waiting, the city cannot afford a misstep. Daniel Price is formally arrested in his cell, the charge read aloud, rights repeated, cuffs applied, and for a moment he looks almost relieved, as if the ambiguity was worse than the accusation, as if knowing what he's facing is easier than pretending it isn't there. The booking photo is taken. It circulates within minutes. A face stripped of control, eyes rimmed red, jaw clenched, and suddenly the man who moved unseen for so long is everywhere, on screens, on front pages, in conversations that spill out of diners and buses and offices, people saying his name out loud, testing how it feels, attaching it to a crime they've carried for years without a culprit. The press conference is scheduled for the afternoon. Officials stand at podiums, words chosen carefully, acknowledging the breakthrough while avoiding triumph, emphasizing process, evidence, patience, and still, no matter how restrained the language, the message lands hard: a 1992 cold case solved, a routine traffic stop exposing a killer, and the phrase echoes because it feels both miraculous and terrifying, the idea that justice can hinge on something so ordinary, so random. Maria Alvarez's family sits together watching the broadcast. They hold hands. They listen. They hear her name spoken by strangers in suits, and it feels surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold, because for them, Maria never left the room, never stopped being present, and now the world is catching up to a reality they've lived with every day. As the charges become public, the phone lines light up.
tips flood in.
Calls from other jurisdictions. Families asking questions that have no easy answers, wondering if the man now named and charged might be connected to losses they've never been able to explain. Cold case units across the Midwest pull files, reopen boxes, search for overlaps, and the scope of the investigation threatens to expand again because once a pattern is named, it invites comparison. Inside the jail, Daniel Price meets with his lawyer for hours. Voices low, papers spread, options discussed that aren't really options at all. The evidence is no longer abstract, no longer hypothetical. It has weight, location, identity, and while the defense will challenge everything, chain of custody, contamination, memory, intent, the foundation is solid in a way it never was before. Price asks one question: how many years? The answer is honest and devastating. Potentially all of them. That night, alone in his cell, Price finally breaks the silence. Not publicly, not to police, but to himself, words whispered into the concrete, fragments of a story that has lived inside him for decades, and the guards later say they heard him talking, pacing, stopping, starting again, as if rehearsing something, as if deciding what version of the truth he's willing to release. The medical examiner's final report adds more detail. Evidence of prolonged confinement. Indicators of stress injuries. No definitive cause of death, but enough to suggest she did not die quickly. The report is clinical, precise, devastating in its restraint, and Maria's family reads it together, stopping often, because facts, stripped of emotion, can hurt more than any accusation. The landfill search expands. Now that one grave has been found, others must be considered, and crews return to the site with renewed urgency, because if Maria was placed there, logic says she may not have been alone. The ground yields more objects, personal effects that don't belong to her: a ring, a scrap of clothing, a shoe sole, each discovery logged, bagged, and carried away like a question without a voice. The prosecutor addresses the possibility carefully. There may be additional victims. The sentence lands like a weight dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, families listening, remembering dates, faces, last phone calls, and the city feels that old familiar chill again, the realization that what's been uncovered may only be part of a larger, darker truth. Daniel Price is moved to a higher security unit. His routine changes. His access narrows. And with the narrowing comes pressure, the kind that squeezes until something gives, and the detectives know it. They don't rush him. They wait. They let the evidence speak, let the headlines accumulate, let the world tell his story without him. It's his lawyer who approaches first. Late in the evening, he requests a meeting, off the record, exploratory, and the detectives agree, knowing what this usually means, knowing that silence has a breaking point, and that point may be closer now than ever before. In the small interview room, Daniel Price sits across from them again. He looks older, smaller, the confidence worn thin. He asks for assurances he can't be given. He asks about deals that don't exist yet. And then, almost casually, he says there are things he can explain, things that would make the picture clearer, things that would help families understand what happened to their daughters. The room goes still, because that word, daughters, is plural. The detectives don't react. They don't lean in. They don't interrupt. They let the silence stretch, because this is the moment where control shifts, where a man who once relied on being unseen realizes that the only power he has left is information, and information, once shared, can never be taken back. Price closes his eyes, inhales, and says he wants to talk, not now, not tonight, but soon, and the timing feels deliberate, calculated, like someone measuring how much truth he can afford to give without drowning in it. The meeting ends without a statement, but it ends with something just as significant. An agreement to meet again. As the city settles into another uneasy night, sirens distant, streets wet with reflected light, the case moves into its final, most dangerous phase, the phase where answers begin to emerge, incomplete, compromised, shaped by the motives of the person who holds them, and everyone involved understands that what comes next may finally close the book on Maria Alvarez. Or it may open a much darker volume that Chicago isn't ready to read. The second interview happens just before dawn. the hour when defenses are weakest and the mind drifts between resolve and regret. Daniel Price is brought in quietly. No cuffs this time, just the soft scrape of a chair and the hum of fluorescent lights that make everything feel harsher than it needs to be. He looks exhausted, eyes sunken, hands trembling slightly, and when he sits, he doesn't bother asking for water, as if comfort is no longer part of the negotiation. The recorder clicks on. For a long moment, no one speaks. Then Price starts talking, not with a confession, not with names or dates, but with atmosphere, memories framed as excuses, as context, as if building a stage before allowing anyone to see the actors. He talks about Chicago in the early 90s, about neighborhoods changing, about feeling invisible, about loneliness disguised as routine. The detectives let him go, because this is how people circle the truth when they're afraid to touch it directly. Eventually, the story tightens. He mentions a woman, then corrects himself. A girl, Maria. He says her name once, quietly, like it might bite him if he repeats it. He describes meeting her by chance, a ride offered, a conversation that never happened the way witnesses remembered it, a version where everything is softer, slower, less violent. But the details betray him, timelines slipping, language shifting, control showing through the cracks, and when he talks about keeping her somewhere safe, the detectives exchange a glance they've practiced for years. Safe is never the word victims use. He admits to holding her. Days turn into weeks in his telling, the passage of time vague, distorted, as if he doesn't want to know how long it really was. He claims she was free to leave, then admits she didn't know where she was. He says she was alive when he left her, then pauses too long when asked how long after that she stopped breathing. The silence answers the question. Price's voice changes after that. Less narrative, more fragments. He describes panic, mistakes, a moment that went wrong. He never uses the word kill, never says murder, but he doesn't need to. By now, the room is heavy with implication, and the recorder keeps spinning, capturing every half-confession, every attempt to soften what cannot be softened. Then comes the part no one was prepared for. Price mentions another name. Not Maria. A different girl, earlier, mid-80s, a runaway. He says someone no one would miss, and the detectives feel the air leave the room, because this isn't expansion, this is confirmation of their worst fear. He doesn't give details yet, just enough to prove it's real, a location hint, a time frame, a reference to a bridge that hasn't existed for 20 years. The interview is paused.
Prosecutors are called.
Supervisors notified. Cold case files begin moving again before the sun is even up, because once a single additional victim is acknowledged, the case is no longer contained. It's a network, and network spread. When the recorder clicks back on, Price seems smaller. The weight of what he's said has settled on him, and now he's bargaining, not for freedom, but for control over the narrative. He asks how much the public will know. He asks if families will be told everything. He asks if cooperating will mean less time, and the answers are careful, honest, unsatisfying, because there are no guarantees left. He gives one more location. Vague but workable. A stretch of land near an old rail spur, now overgrown, forgotten, the kind of place the city paved over emotionally decades ago. He says he doesn't know if anything is still there. He says it was a long time ago. He says he's sorry, but the word lands hollow, detached from consequence. By mid-morning, search teams are mobilized again. Different site, same ritual. Tape, flags, shovels, silence. News of the interview leaks by afternoon. Not the details, just the shape of it, the suggestion that the case has widened, that investigators are now pursuing additional leads connected to the same suspect. The phrase possible serial offenses appears in a headline and the city flinches because that label changes everything, reframing memories people thought they understood. Maria Alvarez's family is informed privately. They sit with detectives, absorbing the fact that answers are coming, but not cleanly, not neatly, and that the man responsible is now offering pieces of a truth that may never fully assemble. They ask if he confessed. They ask if he said why. The detectives answer what they can and leave the rest unsaid, because motive rarely comforts and explanation doesn't undo loss. At the jail, Price is returned to his cell. He doesn't speak to the guards anymore. He doesn't pace. He lies on his bunk staring at the ceiling, as if mapping the past against concrete lines, measuring how much of his life is already over versus how much is yet to be accounted for. That evening, at the rail spur site, a search dog alerts. Not conclusively.
Not yet.
But enough to stop everyone in their tracks. The sun dips low, casting long shadows over disturbed earth, and the detectives standing there feel the familiar pull of dread and obligation, the understanding that every new answer carries the potential to reopen wounds that never truly healed. As darkness falls, the dig continues under lights. And somewhere between the sound of shovels and the static of radios, the case shifts again, no longer about solving a single cold case from 1992, but about confronting a pattern that may stretch back further than anyone wants to admit. What Daniel Price has started to reveal is not a confession. It's a door. And once opened, there is no way to choose what steps out first. Night work has a different gravity, and the rail spur feels heavier under the floodlights, as if the ground itself understands what it is being asked to give up. Shovels cut into soil that hasn't been disturbed in decades, each scrape deliberate, each pause filled with the unspoken hope that nothing will be found and the dread that something will. The dog handler stands rigid, eyes fixed on the same patch of earth, while detectives watch the dig like surgeons waiting for an incision to reveal the truth beneath skin. The first object emerges just after midnight. Not bone, not clothing. A fragment of rusted metal, curved, unremarkable, the kind of debris cities shed and forget. For a moment, disappointment ripples through the team, then caution pulls them back. Nothing here exists in isolation. Soil is brushed carefully, gloved hands moving slower now, because impatience is how mistakes are made, and mistakes here would echo for years. Then comes the smell. Subtle at first, easily dismissed as damp earth or old vegetation, but it lingers, distinct enough to change posture, to stiffen spines. The handler nods once. The dog sits. Everything stops. The site is secured tighter. Forensic specialists step in. Cameras flash quietly, documentation replacing urgency, because this part has rules and rituals that cannot be rushed, no matter how badly answers are wanted. When the first bone fragment appears, pale against dark soil, there is no reaction, no gasp, just a collective tightening, the understanding that this is no longer hypothetical. The remains are incomplete.
Scattered.
Time has not been kind. But enough is there to know that someone died here and that the story Daniel Price hinted at is not fiction. The coroner on call makes a preliminary assessment under artificial light, careful with words, cautious with conclusions, but the implication is unmistakable. This is human. This is old. This matters. By the time dawn breaks, the site is a lattice of flags and markers, each one a question pinned to the earth. Detectives stand back, watching technicians work, their faces unreadable, because this is not victory, not resolution. This is confirmation of loss multiplied. The press gathers by morning. No details are released, but the visuals are enough. Police tape, evidence vans, hushed conversations. Reporters speculate, commentators connect in real time, and the phrase linked cold cases circulates again, louder now, bolder, reshaping the narrative while the investigation is still breathing. Inside the courthouse, prosecutors shift strategy. What began as a single homicide from 1992 has become something larger, something riskier, and the calculus changes. Charges must be solid. Statements must be corroborated. Every word Daniel Price has spoken is now a potential liability if mishandled, and the clock is ticking because once a suspect starts talking, the law demands precision. Price is interviewed again. Shorter this time.
Sharper.
He is shown photographs of the site, not to shock him, but to anchor him. His eyes linger, recognition flickering across his face before he looks away. He asks how much was found. He asks if it can be identified. He asks if this means more charges, and the answer is yes, probably eventually, but not yet because the truth is still assembling itself. When asked about others, he hesitates. The room leans forward. He shakes his head, says he doesn't remember, says he's told them everything he can, and the detectives feel the familiar frustration of a man retreating into selective memory, offering just enough to feel cooperative while guarding the rest like a final possession. Outside, families of missing girls begin calling again. Old flyers resurface. Photographs, once tucked away, reappear on kitchen tables and news broadcasts. Names that haven't been spoken publicly in years find their way back into conversation, and the city collectively reopens a chapter it thought had closed, realizing too late that it had only skipped ahead. Maria Alvarez's case is officially updated. No longer missing. No longer uncertain. The language is careful, clinical, but the meaning is clear, and her family grieves again, differently this time, with the weight of confirmation pressing down where hope once lived. They ask about remains. They ask about timelines. They ask about accountability. Some questions are answered. Others are postponed indefinitely. As forensic analysis begins, the limits of time assert themselves. DNA is degraded. Trauma markers are inconclusive. Cause of death can be suggested, but not proven with the certainty courts prefer. Each gap becomes a defense opportunity, each ambiguity a potential fracture in the case prosecutors are trying to build. Daniel Price knows this. From his cell, he watches news coverage with a strange detachment, studying headlines like a critic reading reviews. He complains about inaccuracies. He corrects small details when his attorney visits. He expresses frustration at being misunderstood, as if narrative control still matters more than consequence. But the city is no longer listening to him. They're listening to the echoes. Community meetings are held. Old police decisions are questioned. Why wasn't this pattern seen earlier? Why were certain tips dismissed? Why did some disappearances receive less attention than others? The questions are uncomfortable, and the answers, when they come, are unsatisfying, rooted in bias, limited resources, and a past that cannot be edited. Detectives revisit files from the 80s and early 90s, searching for overlaps. Vehicle descriptions, witness sketches, geographic clusters. Patterns emerge slowly, reluctantly, like shapes in fog, and each alignment tightens the sense that this case is not an anomaly, but part of something broader, something the city failed to name when it had the chance. One file stands out. A missing person report from 1986. Age 16. Last seen near a bus terminal. No confirmed sightings after. The location Daniel Price mentioned aligns uncomfortably well with the last known movements, and the detectives feel the chill of recognition, the understanding that this may be the name he avoided saying out loud. The family is contacted. Carefully. Gently. They have waited nearly 40 years for any kind of update, and the call brings both dread and relief, the terrible comfort of being remembered by a system that once lost track of them. As weeks pass, momentum builds and fractures simultaneously. Evidence accumulates, but certainty remains elusive. Price's cooperation wanes. His attorney signals a shift, less openness, more caution, and the unspoken message is clear. Whatever leverage existed is evaporating, replaced by legal strategy and silence. The routine traffic stop that started all of this feels impossibly distant now, a spark lost in the fire it ignited. What remains is a complex, fragile structure of statements, soil samples, memories, and grief, all of it balancing on the edge of proof. And beneath it all, a question hums, persistent and unresolved. How many stories are still buried, waiting for the wrong turn, the right stop, the one moment that cracks the surface and forces them back into the light? Because as Chicago watches this case unfold, it becomes clear that solving one cold case does not bring closure. It brings awareness. And awareness has a way of making silence impossible to maintain. By the time winter settles in, the city has learned how to live with the case the way it lives with bad weather, resentful, watchful, never fully prepared. Snow dulls the streets, but it doesn't mute the conversations. Names linger in the air longer than breath. Flyers curl at the corners on bulletin boards that no longer expect miracles. And every update, no matter how small, lands with the same quiet thud. Something has moved, but nothing has ended. The lab reports arrive in pieces. Bone fragments confirm age range. Soil composition narrows a window of time. A degraded trace suggests trauma consistent with restraint, but stops short of certainty. The words are technical, careful, built to survive cross-examination, and in their caution they expose the limits of science when time has had decades to erase its fingerprints. The evidence can speak, but it cannot shout. Prosecutors weigh their options. They have statements that lean toward confession without fully committing. They have a site that confirms at least one additional death without naming it. They have a suspect whose past now casts a shadow long enough to touch multiple decades, but whose present posture is closed, guarded, coached. Charges move forward in the 1992 case because that is where the foundation is strongest, but everything else remains suspended, hovering between suspicion and proof. In court, Daniel Price appears smaller than he did on television. His suit hangs awkwardly. His hair is thinner. He keeps his eyes down, not in shame, but in calculation, as if looking up would give something away. When he listens to the charges read aloud, there is no visible reaction.
No flinch. No protest.
Just the slow blink of someone who has already rehearsed this moment in private. Outside, cameras crowd the steps. Reporters ask about additional victims, about the rail spur, about the 80s. Officials repeat the same phrases. Ongoing investigation, no further comment, families deserve privacy, and the words begin to feel worn, their meaning stretched thin by repetition. Maria Alvarez's family sits in the gallery during one hearing. They don't look at Price. They look straight ahead, hands clasped, faces set, absorbing the sound of their daughter's name being spoken formally, officially, attached to a case number instead of a missing poster. It is not closure. It is recognition, and even that comes with a cost. Behind the scenes, detectives continue working files that may never see a courtroom. They map movements, re-interview witnesses whose memories have aged poorly, track down leads that end in cemeteries or retirement homes. Some doors open only long enough to confirm what cannot be proven. Others never open at all. Each attempt carries the same tension, the fear that something critical will be missed again, and the knowledge that perfection is no longer possible. The rail spur site yields no more remains. Excavation ends quietly, without ceremony, the earth filled back in as carefully as it was disturbed. To passers-by, it becomes nothing again, just an overgrown strip of land beside rusted tracks, but to those who stood under the lights that night, it will always hum with unfinished sentences. Families of other missing girls wait. Some call weekly. Some stop calling altogether. Some alternate between hope and resignation depending on the day, the weather, the rumor they heard from a neighbor. They are told they will be updated if anything changes, and they learn to live inside that conditional, measuring their lives around an if. Daniel Price stops talking entirely. On the advice of counsel, interviews end. Cooperation freezes. What has been given cannot be taken back, but what remains is locked away, inaccessible, protected by the same system now tasked with holding him accountable. In letters to the court, his attorney challenges timelines, questions contamination, emphasizes uncertainty. The strategy is clear. Doubt is enough. The trial moves forward on the 1992 charge alone. Testimony reconstructs a city as it was: payphones, paper maps, radio dispatches crackling with static. Witnesses describe moments they thought were insignificant until time proved otherwise. Experts explain degradation, probability, margin of error. The jury listens, attentive, aware that they are being asked to decide not just what happened, but how much ambiguity they are willing to accept. Outside the courtroom, the broader questions remain unanswered. How many times did opportunity pass unnoticed? How many tips were filed away because they didn't fit a narrative? How many names slipped through cracks that only become visible in hindsight? The case becomes a mirror, reflecting not just one man's actions, but an entire system's blind spots. When the verdict comes, It is decisive for what it addresses and silent on everything else.
Guilty.
The word lands heavy, definitive, and still insufficient. Sentencing follows. Numbers are assigned to years. The future is reduced to terms and conditions. Price listens, expressionless, absorbing the math of his remaining life without comment. There is no mention of the rail spur. No formal acknowledgement of additional victims. Those questions remain parked in the margins, officially unresolved, unofficially haunting every page of the record. Afterward, the city exhales. Not in relief, but in fatigue. One chapter has closed, but the book is thicker now, heavier, its spine cracked by what it holds. People talk about the case less often than not at all, but it never disappears completely. It resurfaces in documentaries, in late-night conversations, in the way certain neighborhoods still feel watched by their own past. At the rail spur, grass grows back unevenly. Rain settles the soil. Trash collects along the fence line. Life resumes its ordinary neglect. But sometimes, someone will stop there, linger longer than necessary, unsure why the place feels charged, as if the ground remembers something the city prefers to forget. In the evidence room, boxes remain labeled but unopened. They wait for technology to catch up, for a witness to remember one more detail, for a confession that may never come. They wait the way cold cases always do, patient, persistent, unwilling to fully disappear. Maria Alvarez's name is no longer a question mark. That matters. But alongside it sit other names, unspoken in court, absent from headlines, their stories incomplete, their endings unknown. For them, time continues to stretch, elastic and unforgiving, pulling hope thinner with each passing year. The routine traffic stop that exposed a killer did what no investigation before it could. It cracked the surface. What it could not do is seal it again. Because once the past breaks through, it doesn't arrive neatly packaged. It comes fragmented, resistant, demanding attention without offering resolution. It forces a reckoning not just with what happened, but with what was missed and what may still be hidden. Chicago moves forward, as cities do. But beneath the noise, beneath the motion, the case leaves a residue, a low-frequency hum of unease, the knowledge that some stories end in verdicts, while others end in silence, and that silence is not emptiness, it is weight. And somewhere between what was proven and what was only suggested, between justice delivered and justice deferred, the cold case remains what it has always been. Solved enough to name a killer. Unsolved enough to never truly let go.